Ornamentation in music is beyond an embellishment. It's about enhancing the melodic line with a meaningful pattern which can be interchangeable or can be fixed. And I find it fascinating how singers in the tradition of the opera of bel canto, beautiful singing, who are doing so improvisatory, and how a composer like Chopin for the piano imitating the operatic singing notated them with bundles of grace notes, because performer pianists are not traditionally trained as singers to enhance a vowel by this vocalise, cadenza, embellishment. And he introduces also in the piano writing, imitative of the lyrical singing, ornamentations from the Baroque, like the mordent, or the biter in Italian or in French, mordre, or the trill, the shaking, which was in Baroque times used as an enhancement of the emotion on a single note, either repeating it in Monteverdi's operas singing, trillo, oh, 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 or the neighboring tone, oh, later in the instrumental tradition. So the trill and the mordent with the appoggiatura and the grace notes are sort of the standardized markings of Baroque music embellishments that are codified rather than displayed, probably as a shorthand, because they didn't need to develop the demonstration of how to make it, since it was always part of their own time period where the tradition was known by those who were doing it. So we assume if they took it from the upper note, from the real note, if they terminated it with a termination, which is an extra embellishment before the next note towards which this first note is extended. And because of the decaying instrument of the 19th century piano, already longer than the harpsichord of the 18th century, Chopin, when he imitates the voice, he adds length of sound by ornamenting the decoration of these notes, effectively reaching the next note with a delayed decay or an avoided decay. Of course, the articulation should be played lighter so that you don't overwhelm by the decoration the main melodic note's purpose to go as a passing tone or an appoggiatura or as the arrival tone of a climax from its destination. In other words, you don't want to cover up by the decoration the purpose of the melodic line. In that sense, you incorporate the decoration in the melodic line. You can call it embellishment, you can call it affect, you can call it many things. But ultimately, it is part of the expression. It's not just an added element which you can dispose of one way or the other. In other words, it's not optional. It's incorporated in the sense of aesthetics for beauty, which was developed in the centuries before the 20th, as in architecture, as in garden landscaping, as in statues, sculptures, is in painting, is in ballet dancing, is in all the different forms of art, forms of expression of the human uplifting of their own finitude towards something larger than them. And you can say that we can today trace the past different time periods by naming them: Rococo, Baroque, Neoclassical, and in fact, Art Nouveau, or more, because it's a way to classify, organize, determine the styles, nothing but for functional inner design. For instance, chairs. No matter how functional they had to be, they had to have different decorative legs, carved or straight. Curved mostly because of the essence of roundness. And as styles evolve, as fashion evolves, as aesthetics evolve, as younger generations find the older aesthetics of beauty old-fashioned by essence, they want to imprint their own aesthetics, to the point to which in the 20th century, the Bauhaus movement of architecture and beyond, with industrial design, we enter in a situation where the functionality determines the shape, and the bareness of it is more important than the decoration of it. So if you have a glass and steel tower in a modern city quarter, you don't need decorations on it because it would appear awkward. But if you have a neoclassical or a romantic era or even Baroque era castle or building of any kind that used decorations for its purpose, its aesthetic need, then you have to do that when you perform the music of the different periods, regardless on which instruments today, which are more modern than the ones of the time, unless you play on those. And you will produce the know-how of the informed interpretation, but you also could choose to transform it, just like Baroque operas are set today by stage managers in modern clothes to determine the or demonstrate rather the universality of the message, though there is some kind of inadequacy with the music because the style of the music through its decorations and ornamentations sort of dates it clearly. And you reach a point where you realize that music is not just a means of translation from one soul to another. It's not only a meaningful language to translate concepts like languages are. It's more about, through the chosen ornament, which either delays a special note that is chosen, like a special word or a special syllable, by a poet, a singer, an opera, a songwriter. There is always that moment where music enhances the text because it's sung, and then some words become so in the lyrics meaningful. And if you delay them with an ornament or a decoration or a suspension or an appoggiatura, whichever way you analytically express it, you realize that it's all about the expression of the sentiment, of the meaning, of the mood. Therefore, the ornamentation, the decoration are part of the statement in its own time frame, beauty aesthetics. And if we play it as we do on the piano, for instance, today outside of its time period, we could define, like for modern architecture aesthetics, that we need just the functional notes. We don't need to play all the decorative notes, especially since we don't play it on the old instruments if we don't. Therefore, we could decide that we don't need to ornament either and present it bare. And so that is where I differ with this aesthetic, is because I find that this is defining that the decoration is to be removed at will or added at whichever taste for it. I think that we are today in a situation where music of today is less melodic. It's more rhythmical, more pulsed, more dissonant, more screaming, more powerful by the decibels and the projections and the microphones and the amplification, and the richest levels of expression that deny the need of a decoration which usefully prolongs the sound's decay on a, let's say, harpsichord of the 18th century in a castle, but doesn't need it with a modern electric guitar that prolongs the sound at will without decay. And the same can be said also for the modern piano. Of course, it does decay ultimately, but much later than the harpsichord used to. And if you apply harpsichord music on the piano, then either or you adapt it, either or you revisit the way it used to be played on the harpsichord, sort of imitating on the piano what you would do on the harpsichord, where the ornaments were blending since the sounds were decaying and were constitutive of the melodic line. Whenever on the modern piano, which is not plucked like the harpsichord but percussive, you have longer sound but with more impactful articulation at the moment of the production of the sound. And with the pedal you can enhance its length, and in comparison, therefore, you can take slower tempi. In other words, the device allows you, through its opportunity, to revisit the piece with a different dimension of displaying and blossoming the sounds artificially compared to what it might have been, but it's in its own way, its own beautiful aesthetics, which is why stage managers often today program operas set in past times in today's outfits and not in the old costumes. In a way, that is what we do when we play harpsichord music on the piano. To a certain extent, we can say that there are communalities between the styles and the instruments. It's the question of how much you exponentially expand the blossoming sound and how much you maintain it from overwhelming you. I find it very appealing to discover how pianists use the motion of the pulse to express the emotion of the melodic line, taking in account the decay that the instrument produces, but which is not embedded in the very meaning of the melodic line which suggest a tension towards a leap, for instance, of an interval, a gesture. And if you do that on the piano, it sounds like an accent coming out of nowhere, and it's shocking if you do that. But if you do it in a way that the sounds connect as if they flow from each other, and the pedaling enhances that, but also blurs it through the fact that you have the accompaniment portion that overlaps. So you have several layers together. And it's how the pianist individually chooses to present this bouquet of sounds, of colors, of atmospheres, which are the main tones, which are the passing tones, which are the appoggiaturas, which are the suspensions, how you differently project the real tone compared to the decorative ornamental tone. You can choose to play them all alike. And it's also a good aesthetic of evenness, of modernity, or you make a hierarchy in the demonstration of your piano touch of the decorative notes and the real notes. You don't place them all on the same level of articulation, projection, depth of touch. You sort of three-dimensionalize your expression on the instrument by bringing in shadow and lights in some kind of depth and foreground of the elements of a melodic line that you can follow this way, not tainted or colorized just for the purpose of it, but by where you place the meaningful syllables of the imaginary lyrics, and where you have the ending syllable that might be lighter, just like when you speak or you sing. And therefore, the decoration, the ornamentation, is truly part of the piece. Not only because it is, but because we need to incorporate it in the way we plan to phrase, bridge, arch the articulation and the phrasing. To have an eloquent expression, deeply rooted in the understanding of what the music is talking about through the sound painting of the interval gestures. Thank you.